Sure.
Uh, so maybe we can start by introducing yourself. Can you introduce yourself to the audience, our viewers?
Okay. Hi, I'm Martin Vengadesan. I'm currently at Malaysia Kini. I've been here a year and a half, and prior to that, I was at the Star for 23 years. I co-authored this book, Malaysian Murders and Mysteries, with my good friend Andrew Sagayam. It just came out about 6 months ago. It's actually a compendium of many of our most famous crime cases over the years, and it's been doing quite well actually. Before the MCO hit, we were very honored to see that the book was in the top 3 in Borders and Times under non-fiction.
Mm-hmm. And how did you go about selecting the topic?
Okay, the idea itself came from the movie producer and author Amir Muhammad. He had this idea that a lot of Malaysians talk about true crimes. They're very interested, but they don't have a good reference. And then his idea was to have these little vignettes of information, not, in other words, bite-sized chunks. Not because actually practically every crime deserves its own book, right? If you just think of the Mona Fendi case or the Altantuya, if you really want to sit down and research and go into great detail, you can actually generate a book out of most of the cases in the last 30 to 40 years. Yeah. So we had to make that decision that we're going to keep it quite bite-sized, a recap, plus talking to journalists, lawyers, and other sources who actually have some inside knowledge of the case.
Okay, cool. So when did you all start?
It was one of the things. We actually started, my God, about 7 or 8 years ago. And we were chugging along quite nicely for the first 3 years. Around about 2013, 2014, about 70-80% of it was done. And including 2 of the key interviewers, the late Kapal Singh and the late Professor Koo K. Kim. They were quite central to the book. But what happened was at some point, my initial publishers ran into trouble, and then I found another one, and they also ran into trouble. And so I was a bit disheartened. At one point, I put the book aside for about 2 to 3 years. And then it was with the change of the government 2 years ago that I decided, okay, there's more democratic space, more freedom of expression. Let me do all these projects that have been sitting in the drawer. Because I actually had, at that point, into 2018, I think I actually had 3 or 4 half-written or quarter-written books, and also 3 or 4 music albums, composed but not recorded. So now I'm on this big drive to get that done.
But how do you manage and juggle all that, in between family, work? It's not easy, managing Star online.
There's a lot of juggling for sure, but for example, with the crime book, I had a partner, Andrew. So sometimes there's an ebb and flow. It's basically what we did was we identified the cases, and then we tried to match them with people who could tell us more about them. In some cases, we couldn't find anyone to expand upon the information, so we were left with. So we decided to drop the case. And sometimes you go to interview somebody about one case, and they tell you about something else, and then you realize you have enough information on that. But yes, you're right. It had to be balanced. I was lucky that I was in newsrooms like the Star in Malaysia Kini, where you have good contacts and people who tell you things. Sometimes you have veteran journalists who covered the case and met Botak Chin 45 years ago, for example, that kind of thing. So I was actually in the right place, and in fact, we all are, all as journalists. It's just that I forced myself to take advantage of it. Mm-hmm. And most recently, by the way, the MCO has been excellent for my writing discipline.
Oh.
I forced myself to really get moving on the next book, and so I've got quite a lot accomplished. I think I'll finish the first draft by June 30th, which is my target.
Yeah, I'm the utter opposite. Not that I'm great, even on normal days. How is your writing process like? Because you co-authored the book, so how did you all divide the work?
Okay, that was see, at the time the idea was suggested to us, I hadn't even been in news that much. I was just a fresh news editor, whereas Andrew was had been a full-time crime reporter for 10 years. So the initial premise was that Andrew would be the guy, in some words, the foot soldier, and I'd be the editor. But as time went on, it sort of changed. Ultimately, I told him to have a consistent narrative. I will do all the final editing and writing. But what we basically did was identify a case, get the factual background, cross-check, triple-check maybe, and then start interviews. So he would know people, I would know people. And we weave the interviews into that narrative.
Okay.
So after a while, virtually all of that was done by me, but Andrew was very central in getting the interviews.
Cool. And then, how long did it take for you to write the entire book?
Oh, well, because of the stop and start thing, it's really hard to gauge. But I do remember that I took about 2 weeks off at one point, and a lot of progress was made during that time. I think roughly 15,000, 20,000 words were done during 2 weeks. I told myself every day you write. It's like every day you write one massive feature article. And then I did it for 2 weeks, and then the book progressed in leaps and bounds. That was it was actually in 2014. So I actually had to some extent, we had a virtually complete book in 2014, but no publisher.
Right.
And so when we revived it a little later, I had to update all those cases certainly not the ones that are very old, but the ones that are relatively recent. There are developments. Sometimes people get convicted of the crime and then freed on appeal, that kind of thing.
Right. Of all the cases, do you have a favorite? I suppose it's a bit macabre to call it favorite, but
yes,
stood out for you.
It really is. It is difficult to say there's a favorite. What I can certainly say is that most Malaysians come up to me and talk about the Jean Sinapa case, which was that of a beauty queen who was found dead near the old airport road, Subang, in the late 70s. Mona Fendi is another one that really seems to interest a lot of people. But for me, it's certainly not my favorite, but it's actually a child abuse case of baby Balasundram, which has always, I've never forgotten it. And actually, the poor baby was found on May 13, 1990. I remember that in hospital, and he was dying, and he died soon after that. And that particular case is definitely the most emotionally moving for me, because I remember footage of the boy, the dying baby in the ICU. And even when I interviewed Kapal Singh, teared up, and he said it's actually that is the worst case he's seen. And so for some reason, that one really does stand out. Another one that is really very memorable is Batang Kali, the Batang Kali massacre, which actually happened in the aftermath of World War II, right? And so we went there 60 years afterwards, and that community was very Chinese speaking. It was at that time it was Chinese rubber tappers. So there were actually people I was there with who had helped carry the bodies, or who had lost their father, and so on and so forth. And even though the interview was conducted by my colleague in Mandarin and other dialects, it was still very emotional too. Sometimes you see, that's when you realize that an event that happened a whole lifetime ago has affected them throughout. They can't let go, and it's very understandable why.
Guess naturally, I would want to ask, why write a book about such dark topics?
Um, I think it's at the back of a lot of people's mind. I think one I knew that crime interested a lot of people. Secondly, the concept of justice is quite a strange one. Actually, deep down, I think a lot of us know that you don't find justice on earth in this life, right? So many of the cases you actually read, it looks like the real perpetrator has gotten away, and yeah, so I think that concept of the search for justice is really interesting to me. I think that there are a lot of people whose belief systems imply that there's some sort of post-death judgment and or karma or something, but that's certainly not my belief system. So for me, it's important that we recognize what a great struggle it is, and how much injustice actually goes on all around us. For example, one of the cases was the death of an Indian man in a police detention center, right, in a lockup, and and it was quite clear that he had been physically abused, and that led to his death. And actually, this is a trend. He's a ethnic Indian. I did research for over going back to 15 years of crimes, and found that 80% of reported lockup deaths involve Indian males. To me, it's the equivalent of Black Lives Matter, right? So it's something that you want to highlight. The most recent case in two of the most recent cases in the book include one is that of Richard Huckle, this British pedophile who infiltrated a religious community here. He actually did it through the church, which in some ways makes it even more vile. And he used the position of trust to abuse a lot of children. And yet another one was that of the Orang Asli death in Kuala Ko last May and June. Just found that 16 people lost their lives, and to this day, I mean, it's still a little bit of a mystery, and sometimes there's social conditions as well. So there are a lot of important issues to address that are related to crime.
And after finally packaging everything together and then shipping it, I remember there was a snag, a challenge or two.
Yeah, but wait, after putting together, wait, which one do you mean? Getting it in the bookstores or?
Yeah, any challenge you can think of right now. I just want to surprise the
Right.
viewer.
Well, actually, what happened was there were many different steps before I finally got a publisher. My publisher, Marshall Cavendish, is from Singapore. So there were a lot of false starts in terms of publishing. About 3 different times I was told, yes, we want you. Somebody signed a contract. I signed a contract with the publisher. It looked like it was coming out, and then that failed. And then sometimes we were told we were shortlisted, but somebody had changed their mind. And then yet another publisher said, we actually like this, but we want you to rewrite this. And then it was half the book. So I thought I wasn't really in the mood to do that. So at the point at which we were accepted by Marshall Cavendish, I'd actually told myself, this is the very last one. If they're not interested, then I'm going to self-publish. So yeah, that was quite a journey. But once we signed to Marshall Cavendish, everything has been quite smooth. They've been very supportive at promo events and things like that. The only thing is that the MCO has perhaps dented our momentum.
Doesn't seem to be affecting its ranking.
Yeah, I guess the rankings hold. Is it that, for example, I had this plan. Andrew and I were being interviewed by different media and going on radio. So like the week of MCO, we were supposed to appear on BFM. So and then so that was about, I guess, 2.5 months ago.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the first time I'm talking about the book since then.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So I guess there's been a dent in momentum for sure in terms of building up, but hopefully once things return a bit to normal, we will see that book sales are still there, and we'll be able to do some more push for that.
For the sake of Malaysian writers, how did you approach the whole publishing process? Like, did you pitch it to the publishers? How did it all happen?
I think yes. Well, okay. Remember, don't forget at the very beginning, it was suggested to me by somebody who was thinking of publishing it himself.
Mm.
So, but then when I was like about 20 to 30% of the way through, he had some change in direction. So I too didn't count on it. Then I just thought, okay, let me finish. So I realized that what is key. By the time I came to Marshall Cavendish, the book was already virtually like a finished product. So I didn't really. So I think when the editors can and those judging on whether or not to publish a book have a very good idea of what the book is like, I think it makes a big difference. I think if I just paint a picture and say, okay, I'm doing a crime book with 42 cases, and I'll be talking to journalists, police, lawyers, and then all you have is like 100 words, a 100-word proposal, then nobody can judge on that. But in the end, there was virtually the complete book. So that's what I'm doing in my next book as well. I want to have a substantial first draft. And when that is ready, I will again discuss it with the publishers. They know this is very different. My next book is a science fiction novel that
Really?
yes, set in Malaysia in 2057 when the country would be 100. A lot of changes due to environment and disease and what have you, and global pressures. So it's very different. There's no guarantee that people who like the first book will be interested in the topic of my second. And not only that, I've actually chosen quite a. It's not a straightforward, very conventional science fiction book. Every alternate chapter is quite a diversion from the main story. So the main narrative goes in chapters 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, and so on. But all the even chapters are quite different, and chapter 4, for example, is a very thinly veiled rewrite of my own childhood.
Okay.
Yeah. And chapter 12 is done in the style of. I'm also quite interested in these absurdist plays as well as comic writing like Saki and P.G. Wodehouse. So chapter 12 is like a dark comedy. So I do have. So I think it'll be quite a challenge for me to convince somebody straight off that the risks I'm taking in this style of storytelling are necessarily worth it. But I've always envisaged this book to be like that.
So, what made you decide to switch to fiction instead of continuing the trend?
I think if I actually have a lot of writing from my time as a music writer, more than I think enough to fill a couple of books. So I also have been a political columnist for quite some time. So I actually have enough non-fiction material to work on a couple of books. That would probably be next. But somehow I just feel that the work of the science fiction is the best way of presenting my own ideas about life.
Yeah. And well, I suppose I'll interview you, but the fiction one is done. Or not, it will be about 2 books.
Yes, true.
Right. So how do you feel now that the book is done and in the bookstores and doing pretty well?
Yeah, of course it's very encouraging when you hear like when you were telling me that there's a book group where people are saying good things about it, and then I have so much support from my immediate family and my extended family, aunts and uncles coming, my sisters in England and America bought 5 to 10 books each, and to meet Andrew's family as well, and then our primary, because Andrew and I went to the same primary school. So our primary school classmates, 3 or 4 of them came to show their support. And then we had very good friends from the Star, very good friends from Malaysia Kini, all coming to support us. So it's actually very humbling to find that people are interested. And not only that, there are different people whom you don't know who come up and tell you this book is important to me. It matters. For example, At my second book signing, um, one of the one of the people who participated had lost family members on MH370, and
Yes,
so
that's
she
one
told
of your stories in there, isn't it?
yes, and so she told me, "Thank you for keeping this alive." And it's actually very emotional, also, right? I mean, MH370, for example, will be one of the great mysteries of our time. It looks like it will forever be a mystery. And I mean, looking at it, I feel I didn't do it. Maybe I didn't do that justice, right? Fitting that huge event in just a few pages. Uh, but the fact that it mattered to somebody that we had done it was also important to me.
Right. So, one of the few last questions I have is like, what advice would you give writers, especially those who struggling to finish their work? Like yours was a huge, long process, and there were a lot of starts and stops and starts and stops, and yet you managed to finish. So, what would you tell these writers?
I think when I finally realized, and I realized it at the age of 45 or something, is that you have to be to block book the time where it's not about work, it's not about family, it's not about meeting your friends for drinks. You just got to say no. I am cordoning off this amount of time, 2 to 3 hours a day, to write, to work on my novel, and then I expect to get it from maybe 20% complete to 30 to 40%. You set targets, your discipline. I mean, it's not great to just think about just numbers. At some point, I mean, obviously you're thinking about quality as well. But if you actually write the raw material and then go back and edit it later, you force yourself to be disciplined about generating the volume. I think that's the key thing. Because I mean, really, everybody has everybody's life story is actually worth telling, and everybody would know of other people's interesting stories and experiences. So it's about being disciplined, and do you really want to do this? And I think I also, aside from the change in government in 2018, I was also in a time of my life where things were changing, and I suddenly realized, okay, maybe it was time for me to realize that what I wanted to leave behind, what my legacy to be, and that's why I had this double thing of recording music albums and writing books.
All right. So, before we end this interview, do you want to add anything else?
No, just thanks very much for talking to me. I'm very excited that and Andrew and I will be coming out with our third album quite soon after MCO, and then I hope to submit my the first draft of the science fiction novel in a couple of months. So my target is by the end of the year to have my third album and second book, and yeah, I'm very excited about it.
Oh, I do have one more question though. I mean, how do you juggle all these things without burning out? I mean, how do you take care of yourself? I mean, productivity is one thing, but if you leave very little time for self-care, you could burn out. So how do you take care of yourself and still remain?
Okay, thing is, I don't sleep much. I've always had this problem, not sleeping much, so I try to be a bit more productive. Rather than brooding about the state of the world, try to do something for my own projects. Oh yes, I've also banned myself from being too interested in TV shows, movies, computer games, and all those things which I actually love but take up a lot of time. So the last 3 years, I've done very little of that. Yeah.
So it requires some sacrifice, kind of.
Yeah. It is, but it's also like it's really worth it, lah. And in some of the things like the music, I actually a lot of music was written in my teens and my 20s. So I've actually had it sitting around for about 15, 20 years. So in that time, I learned how to play the songs on different instruments as well. So when I finally became disciplined about recording, it was actually quite fast because I've been playing them for half my life.
Right, right. Okay, I swear this is the last question, but every writer has a way that they can refill the creative well. Like for me, when I listen to music, then I straight away can imagine scenes from my book. So do you have like a way that you can recharge your creative well to get inspired to write your stories?
Um, yeah, well, I read a lot. It's a tricky balance between reading. Sorry, I read a lot, and then when for example, I listen to music all the time while writing. And for example, when I'm working on a science fiction novel, I do try to watch a science fiction show here and there. But then, so it's a tricky balance between being inspired a little and then becoming a copycat, right? So I've this year it's been Doctor Who and Star Trek Picard, and then when they both
We can't yet.
when they both started watching a rerun of Space 1999.
Mhm.
But that's it. Because I limited myself. Remember, I told you I try not to spend too much time on outside things. So I guess music is my most constant inspiration.
Awesome. All right. So, right, we're going to end the interview. So, do you have anything else to say?
No, just thanks very much, everyone, for being interested. Thanks, Liz, for talking to me.
No
And
worries.
forward to your next book as well.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, everyone. So, Martin is signing off. So, do you have a way that readers can contact you?
Yeah, actually, I'm on Facebook. I always answer messages there. Facebook, it's my page which says Martin Vengadesan, journalist, journalist, musician, author.
Cool. Cool.
Way to get me.
So we'll direct them there because I think a lot of them want to reach you, judging from the comments on Facebook.
Okay. Yes, please. Yeah, I look forward to talking to them.
Okay. All
All
right.
right.